This isn't the all-new 2026 Subaru Outback, but it could still be your new Outback. Because if you're in the market right now for a new Subaru, this is what you'll find out on the lot. And now that we know 26 is on the way and have had a chance to take a closer look at it, it's clear there are going to be some pretty noticeable differences. But that's what we're going to dive a little bit further into today. And spoiler alert, why all things being equal, this might be the one that I prefer to drive away with. I'll start with a little bit of honesty, and that's just to say that I haven't loved that each generation of Outback just seems to be a bigger Outback. But the way automotive trends work, that's to be expected. I think the reason it bothers me so much with this particular model is that it's getting farther and farther from where it started, which is as a very practical car, or in layman's terms, a wagon. And the larger and larger it gets, the closer it's creeping towards SUV. And it's done a really good job of keeping its shape, minus one generation where it definitely plumped up a little bit. But we've kept some of the car characteristics, and a lot of that comes in the form of styling. The front end here, if you took the rest of the vehicle away, could still seem like a car, even though, again, it's a little bit taller than it used to be. There's a lot of shape up here, and that's something I really appreciate because you want your car to look good. And again, I said car. An SUV just doesn't seem to have the same sleekness or presence. It wants to be noticed. It's bigger, it's bolder. And that's exactly what we're getting for 2026, is a much bolder front end. It's taller, broader, stronger, boxier. And in that, I think it's losing some of the shape that I so appreciate we get here. Not just in overall body lines, but in some of the stylistic pieces. This is a Subaru, so we do have plenty of black plastic cladding, but it's all wrapped around and built into this shape, where in 26, I think it gets just a little bit clunky. Although admittedly, we have a top end trim, so there might be a little bit more chrome than I would like, but representative of the rest of the Outback lineup, I think I prefer this over the new one. For those of you who know or care, this is obviously not the Outback of old, but the proportions have remained close enough to go ahead and count in my book. But the proportions are key. We get a very car-like front end with a low slung hood and a much steeper rake in this A-pillar versus something more vertical. But that steep rake does end at a pretty high roofline, and that roofline carries all the way through basically to the rear of the car, meaning we get more headroom for your second row passengers and we get more cargo capacity back here versus a standard trunk, where obviously things are going to be shrunk down just a little bit. But the whole vehicle still remains on the smaller end. 192 inches long is not going to be what people would call short, but at 66 inches tall, including these roof rails, this is a little bit short. And for me, it's not just about being able to fit in a parking spot, it's just about how much vehicle there is, how much mass you end up carrying. And that's one of the benefits of a wagon, is that the mass is going to be balanced out a little bit differently, but I'll talk about that more on the road. The other thing you get is easier access to these roof rails, because instead of having to reach higher up, whatever you're loading on top is going to be a little bit more accessible. But it is worth noting that at 8.7 inches of ground clearance, this would make a very tall sedan, but that's okay. I don't mind that. And from 2025 to 2026, there's really only one change when it comes to ground clearance, and that's going to be exclusively on the Wilderness model. So unless you need 9.5 inches of ground clearance, then the fact remains that in 25, you're not really losing anything over 26. And I will actually, in my opinion, add that you get a bit of a gain here, and that's going to come in the wheels and tires, because there are some changes as we move to the new model year, and Subaru has started putting bigger wheels on other models. We saw on the Forester that you can now get an 19-inch wheel, and that 19-inch wheel, unfortunately for me, has made its way over to the Outback. And the proportions, again, here really work for me because this 18-inch wheel fits how much body there is. But because everything's a little bit bolder, a little more striking, and ultimately a little bit more mass on that new model, at least, again, the visual mass, the 19-inch wheel is probably going to fit all right, but I tend to prefer a smaller wheel and tire. And it's not my war on big wheels, but I do have some preferences. Onto the back, where we get a good mix of form and function. This is a utility vehicle. I want to be able to carry everything I'm taking with me, but I don't want to lose a good look. And to me, this still retains more of a car-like look because it keeps such a low waistline, at least lower than you find in a lot of competition. At 6 feet tall, it is just about my waistline, but one thing to note is that this is a little bit shorter than not only other competition, but even Subarus like the Forester, which means that if you are a little bit taller, you are going to want to watch your head. I can fit under here, but I have to be careful because I may go ahead and bump myself on that lip. The trade-off though is that when you're loading in and out, we have a much lower load floor, and that's going to be to the benefit of, I think, more people than having this be a little bit taller, because whatever you're loading is going to be easier to do, especially if that happens to be your dog. The only thing you're missing from a bigger vehicle or the 2026 is going to be a little bit more vertical space. But since this is as big of a bag as you can carry on a regular flight, and I can fit this vertical, I don't see the whole point. At 32.5 cubic feet, this can fit 7 24-inch roller bags, and that is a whole heck of a lot. The only thing we're missing again is going to be a little bit more space, but unless you do a lot of vertical stacking in your car, I don't think you're missing much. On the new model, you get about 2 more total cubic feet, but again, a lot of that's going to come into height. A couple inches spread around is going to ultimately add up to quite a bit, but the big opening is exactly what we would want. Very functional. If I take this out though, we will see under the load floor, there is a little bit more storage capacity, not a lot. Directly under this, you'll find the tools that you need to go ahead and change your tire. And if you go a little bit further, you'll find the tire that you can go ahead and change too. This is going to be a temporary, but closer to a full size than it is a donut. So kind of that in between. Either way, wherever you take your Subaru and all of your stuff, you should be able to get to and from in a very important way. And that's exactly why you probably bought a Subaru in the first place. Now, one more look at the design here, because I do really like these taillights. I also like the somewhat minimal badging, but we still have a bit of a slope here. And that slope is what lends this to not just being a squared out boxy machine, and again, just a little bit more personality. But if you want more personality on your Subaru, I'm going to point you right here towards this badge. It says Touring, but it also says Touring XT. So let's go talk about that XT. No matter what Outback you get, 25 or 26, it's going to come with a 4-cylinder boxer engine paired with a CVT transmission. Now that base engine is going to be 2.5 liters, putting out 182 horsepower, 177 pound-feet of torque. But as you may be able to tell, this is not that base engine. XT means turbo, and this is a 2.4 liter turbo, putting out 260 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque. While you will take a little bit of a hit in fuel economy, the miles per gallon is definitely going to go up, and so too is your towing capacity, up to 3,500 pounds. But the great news is that these engines are essentially carried over into the next model. The only difference is that 2.5 liter got a little bit of rework and has ever so slightly different numbers, but I expect things like fuel economy and overall on-road performance to be pretty much exactly the same. In typical Subaru fashion, not only do we have a mossy green exterior, but we now have a brown interior. And if this isn't quintessential Subaru, I don't know what is. But so is the weather, and I'm kind of sort of the target market. But let's talk about why, if I was keeping score between 25 and 26, 25 starts to fall behind. The main culprit is going to be that infotainment screen, but I'm going to skip over that for just a moment because we're going to start here on the gauge cluster. The thing with this gauge cluster is that it's pretty analog, and analog relative to a lot of the market and some of the newer Subarus, including that 26, where we'll see the new digital cluster, but I think we have enough going on here. You can see left and right is going to be an analog gauge, and perfect, that's what we're used to. But and actually, not only are we used to it, but it's what digital gauges often mimic, they just do it on a screen. But I think the issue is that the center screen is pretty small. And while you can cycle through a bunch of information, it's unusual, especially in a car that is the top end trim. There is no higher Subaru model you can get, and we just don't have a bigger or more colorful or more interesting display. The biggest issue with this screen is mostly going to be based around software. As you can see, I am on Android Auto. And this is something that I can do wirelessly, so that's 2 check marks in the easy-to-use functions. The problem is when we come to some of the built-in Subaru software, and this is really where it starts to feel aged. This, to me, feels like mid-2000s, maybe early 2010s as far as the layout, the design. It feels like an old GPS that I used to have, and I don't mean a GPS on my phone, I mean a separate GPS unit. But in here we have a lot of built-in buttons where they used to be physical switches. So things like our automatic brake hold, where on a lot of cars it's a button, here it's built into the screen. Auto stop, there as well. When you want to go deeper into your climate control, you do have to go into the climate screen to get more information. Now, as you can see, we do have left and right, so it's dual climate. We can switch the temperatures, but if you want to change things like where the air is blowing from, and you want to see that a little clearer, you have to go here into this screen to do that. It's not going to be a problem for me. I like to set my things to auto and move on from there, but I can understand why for some folks this would be a little bit frustrating. The only other thing we have up here is volume and tuner knobs, and your emergency flasher is located just up here in the top left. But like I said, there's just not a lot going on. One more thing, the X mode button, which is generally a button, is now built here into the screen on what is a dedicated separate display. And I appreciate that we have things broken up and you can use this information however you want, but I don't want to have to scroll through menu, submenu to access everything in here. X mode is one of those things most people are not going to use very regularly, but when you do, you have to know where it's at. And I'll admit, it took me a while to find in here. Moving on from the screen, we'll take a quick look at this center display because that also got a refresh. And I will put some of these things side by side, just like I did on that infotainment screen, because that infotainment layout is very different, but the functions are probably similar, though the software should be updated. I didn't get a chance to play with that software a lot when I was with the 2026 Outback, but I certainly expect, and from the pictures I've seen, that it's going to be sharper than what we have here. I'll move back to that center console briefly, and located just under this infotainment screen is where we're going to find a nice slot to slide your cell phone in. I do have a larger phone and that fits pretty well, but you do want to make sure if you're plugging things in, you're careful about it because it can get a little bit cramped in there pretty quickly. We have a headphone jack, 3.5 millimeters, USB-C and USB-A. So there are options, but again, it can get a little bit cramped. Parking brake is electronic and located right there. Your shift lever located just below that, which does include a manual mode. There are paddle shifters there on the steering wheel. And then just back here, we have our cup holders. And actually, one of the things I love about these cup holders is that it has a nice low-tech solution for folks who have a variety of cup sizes. And in the home of Starbucks, then you definitely have a variety of cup sizes. I love a low-tech option. So this is essentially just a cup holder riser. And that just makes things a little bit easier to manage. In here, we have 2 tier storage. So pull 1 is going to be just a little bit of a tray. Pull 2 is going to open up for a little bit more capacity, not a ton because there is a transmission back here. It also has what looks like our CD player, but it does have an extra power location. So if you do want to use that cigarette style power outlet, you can have one down below. I will say, to me, this is a pretty attractive design and layout, and everything is nice and easy to get to. I think some people will appreciate that in 26, that screen goes a little bit taller, so you're looking more towards the road rather than away from the road. But overall, the Subaru is still going to look like a Subaru, and that is one thing Subaru owners appreciate because they want the newer version of whatever it is they had, and they are going to get that when they move into a new Outback. But let's get this thing out on the road, and I'll talk about seating just a little bit more when I get there. As you can see, I've got a little bit of rain, which would normally hamper some of the testing that we like to do, but because this is not the first time we've seen this exact model, I'll post a link down in the description below for the full review, as well as the numbers that we got at our prior testing up at the top of the screen, which just lets me talk about what it's like to drive this car. And I'll actually start by talking about riding in this car. This is easily one of the most comfortable seats I've sat in quite a while. It just fits my body. And for the type of vehicle it is, and I'm just going to categorize this simply as an adventure vehicle, I love the fact that I'm not bolt upright. Now, I actually do like to leave my seat pretty far vertical, but I actually just mean where I sit in relation to the road. This is a car driving position. My legs are out in front of me, but I also have great support. The seat not only hugs me pretty well, but we also have things like an extending thigh cushion, and to make things more comfortable is this suspension. This is the car I would take just about anywhere. If you want to go on an adventure, this is probably what you should take. A couple reasons for that. For me, we've got enough room for people and stuff in the back. And when I say people, I also mean me. This is not the tallest vehicle in its class, even though it's going to compete size-wise with something like a Honda Passport or a Toyota 4Runner. It has enough headroom for me where vehicles like the 4Runner kind of don't. And that's going to be this year's model, and next year's model of the Outback gets just a little bit more. And again, I haven't had a chance to sit back there long enough to tell you yes or no, or maybe I just don't remember. Either way, I already fit back here, so extra headroom is just extra headroom. But it's about some of those road surfaces and some of the driving dynamics of this vehicle, and I've driven enough Subarus off-road to know that everything is tuned the way I would like it. They are not going to be as capable as some of those competitors. But the question I have for you, and the one I'd suggest you ask yourself, is what is the adventure that you're going on? Because if it is going camping, or maybe you're going to be on a dirt track, maybe there's some ruts in the road, you like to do a lot of snow sports, this is still probably going to be enough for you. If you start crawling, that's where you're going to run into some issues. But we've done some crawling in these vehicles and been in the same positions that we find vehicles like a Jeep, who's looking for a reason to use its Jeepness, and you kind of have to look for it these days. When you're not on the adventure and you're just going where you please, this is also going to be a much better driver than those, in my opinion. And here's why. Center of gravity is going to be part of it. There's a lot of factors to that. Starting from the engine, because we got a boxer engine, it sits a little bit lower, yada yada, people have heard it before, but it starts to add up. The biggest difference though is that this is not just many inches shorter than things like a Passport or a 4Runner, but it's also coming in at this heaviest model, right? XT Touring means this is the heaviest you can get, and I'm certainly not helping that equation. It's gonna come in at least 500 pounds lighter than the lightest models of those other two. And if you go with the hybrid 4Runner, you're looking at a much heavier vehicle. That's going to be huge when it comes to things like driving dynamics. You're going to feel the extra weight, or in this case, you don't really feel the extra weight. And paired with this engine, this peppier engine in the Outback lineup, this is just a lot of fun to drive. No sports car, absolutely not, but a lot of fun to drive. Fun and comfortable don't always mix, but I really think we found that balance here. And that's why I've really enjoyed my time with this so far. The other thing that's gonna make that road trip more fun is paying less to do it. So even though we have the peppier engine here, meaning less fuel economy, we're still gonna see more than those other two that I mentioned. Off-road prowess isn't really gonna be the strong suit here. Things like that X mode are engaging software. We have no lockers, we don't have an extra lift function, right? No adaptive air suspension or anything like that in these models. So your ceiling is gonna be pretty limited, but I also feel like the floor is pretty high. And in a world where adventures are more idealistic than they are practical, there are lots of things I would like to do that I just haven't yet. And maybe some people are braver or bolder than I, but I also know a lot of Subaru owners who really push their Subarus to the limit and do things like lift them themselves and put bigger tires on them. To each their own, but really I think this is as much off-road capability as one would likely need, especially when it comes to things like your winter driving, because the symmetrical all-wheel drive system is not necessarily the best. There's a lot of subjectivity there, but it's going to be one of the most predictable. And when I say reliable, I mean it's going to do what you expect it to do when you need it to do so. And that's going to be something I think people definitely lean into. A few weeks ago when I was driving the Forester Hybrid, the question I had is, where's the Forester XT? Because the XT is something that Subaru owners really enjoy, and after driving this one, I definitely see why. It's been a while since I've been behind the wheel of a turbocharged Subaru, and it does what it's supposed to do. But what we're missing here in the Outback lineup, and what I think would take it another step above some of the competition, is that hybrid option. I don't know if that means a plug and play from what the Forester and Crosstrek are doing, or if it's a whole new system. And actually, if I were to put my wish list together right now, I would tell Subaru, if they're listening, to go ahead and do a plug-in hybrid option when it comes to the Outback, because we should have a little more space to be a little bit more flexible, to find more room for a battery, and ideally still keep a spare tire, but can't get everything all at once. So there hasn't been an Outback hybrid yet. It's obviously not coming in this generation, but the next generation, 2026 and beyond, I wouldn't be surprised if we see one not too far down the road, just probably not tomorrow. So here's the long and short of it. This is a Subaru Outback, and the next generation is also probably still a Subaru Outback, because dimensionally everything's pretty much the same, although aesthetically it's moved a step farther away from wagon than I'm probably comfortable with, or at least I would prefer. Because the Outback is unique in that it doesn't have to fit that SUV mold. There's an Ascent if you need something bigger, there's a Forester if you want just kind of a different layout, but if you want a wagon, if you want comfortable, if you want easy to get in and out of, and to load and to unload, and 8.7 inches of ground clearance, but you don't need a big SUV, you can get an Outback. And I really just don't want to lose that. The new one, the aesthetics lend themselves much more towards an SUV, and it makes it closer to a Forester than I think it really needs to be. And the area I can point to that speaks to me in a negative way is gonna be right here on the C-pillar. In this model, that C-pillar is designed to disappear. It blends in and it keeps this looking very sleek, at least comparatively. The new one has a matching body color panel, and that makes it stand out, which makes the whole body feel a lot bigger to me. Not that I hate the colors, it's just more pronounced. And there's only one exception where I think I'm probably okay with that at this point. That's gonna be on the Wilderness trim, because not only does the Wilderness badge end up right here, making it seem like there's a reason for that to be there, you also get a few more things on the Wilderness that really match this new rugged aesthetic, because obviously Wilderness is dying to go further and farther and better. You not only get a lot more body cladding and kind of different layout, but you also get more ground clearance, and that is a difference from the 25 model, where the Wilderness didn't really get any more extra ground clearance. The new one goes from 8.7 up to 9.5, and that's a pretty significant jump. So for folks who are going to use it, it makes sense that you would get that one, but I think I'd rather Subaru build that as almost a standalone model and leave this one alone. Let me know down in the comment section below, have you shopped for an Outback and found that you couldn't fit what you needed to there in the back, or was there a different reason you went somewhere else? Or did you drive this and say, yes, this is definitely the standout? Let me know. In the meantime, it's started to pour pretty heavy today, and it seems like it happens every time I film a Subaru. So it's time for me to go ahead and hit the road. If you want more of us, you can find us not just on our YouTube channel, but also Facebook. If you want to listen to us on your commute to work, you can find us on our Auto Buyer's Guide podcast that is on YouTube and your favorite streaming services.